Hello, Dallas Johnson here. I hope you are well. You know, I am probably one of the biggest cheerleaders for getting into the car dealer industry, which I still believe is the world's greatest business because it allows you to access dealer auctions, and whether you are physically in a dealer auction or bidding on vehicles online through the multitude of online dealer auctions, you can now access with a dealer's license. This is truly a phenomenal business, but we are a tightly regulated business because we are such a high profit industry, and many high profit industries tend to be very tightly regulated. The real estate profession is tightly regulated because of the profits. The insurance industry is tightly regulated because of the profits. If you're obtaining a securities license to sell stocks and bonds, it's tightly regulated because of the high profits. So when you have a dealer's license, it's tightly regulated because it tends to be a very high profit business. And unfortunately, in the past, we've had a multitude of fraud committed by a small fraction of licensed motor vehicle dealers. And I think 25 or 30 years ago, a person would get his license, sell a vehicle to a customer, not disclose any mechanical defects, get the customer out the door, lock the door, then turn around and lie to the next customer. And those days are now over. Every state requires that you give full disclosure on your vehicles and must even display a buyer's guide on every vehicle, let your customers know whether or not you're offering a warranty. So because of the fraud in the past, we are now seeing much tighter regulations over currently licensed dealers. Now, as I travel through the country showing entrepreneurs like you how to obtain a dealer's license, or as I help currently licensed dealers take their income to another level, the people I meet, like you, are honest, ethical, hardworking folks that would never dream of conducting any fraudulent transaction, and they operate their businesses with the highest level of ethical standards on every transaction. However, unfortunately, there still are a handful of dealers that conduct fraudulent transactions, and I want to talk about those fraudulent dealers right now. In many cases, dealers go to prison for not paying taxes or doing other unethical things. A lot of fraud can be conducted in this business, but I think the dealers that are conducting fraud are really a very, very small minority of licensed motor vehicle dealers. And you know, when you have a dealer's license, you're set up to have some really big profits with your dealer's license. But when you have your dealer's license, you've got to pay your taxes. And I tell every person that takes my training course, you got to set aside some of those profits for your taxes. So in New York recently, a father and son duo were both sentenced to prison, and the father was sentenced to 8 years in prison and the son was sentenced to 3 years in prison for understating the value of their inventory to pay lower taxes. And they were also accused of making numerous false statements to conceal their assets from financial institutions, and they even filed bankruptcy. Sometimes dealers will file bankruptcy so they don't have to pay their creditors, which is obviously not a good idea. And if you ever have bankruptcy, obviously your bond pricing is going to go through the roof. But as a result of that transaction, they had over $500,000 in unsecured debt. And they were actually convicted of not paying taxes. So they actually committed identity theft and even used other consumers' personal identification in connection with obtaining fraudulent car dealer loans. So that father and son were convicted of bank conspiracy, and they were actually sentenced to several years in prison. So there are a lot of prison sentences, being implemented all over the United States. You've really got to set those profits aside. If you've never owned a business, you've got to make sure that you set some of your profits aside for your taxes. You're going to get hit with a tax bill. And, I'm a big believer that, put 20-30% of your income right into some account that you don't touch. And that way you're always going to be ready to pay your taxes because I guarantee you Uncle Sam's going to want a little bit of the action when you get your dealer's license. There was a dealer in Nebraska that was recently sentenced to a year in prison for bilking lenders out of $500,000 and was ordered to pay that $500,000 in restitution and serve 4 years in prison. So they pleaded guilty for obtaining a line of credit from a bank after creating false financial statements that included lines of credit from other banks. And so that Nebraska dealer was indicted on 13 counts of wire fraud. If you ever send false information to a bank, that's called wire fraud. It's big crime, very, very serious crime. And that dealer was actually convicted of 1 count of money laundering. So lots of times dealers will create false financial statements to get certain credit and loans from various lenders to buy vehicles, such as with the floor plan. So when you're filling out a floor plan application, you've got to make sure that it's true and accurate. You can never inflate your assets to try and get more money. That's fraud. So I want you to really be aware of that. And lots of times dealers will use money from one lender and while buying the same vehicle and making personal use of the extra borrowed money. That's a big no-no here. And you have to make sure that all your paperwork that you're submitting to any bank when you're either getting a loan to start your business or maybe a floor plan, these documents have to be accurate. A dealer in New Jersey is going to spend 2 years in prison for wire fraud as well. And he intentionally defrauded lenders and customers of his car dealership. He obtained loans from auto finance divisions of banks for cars that he never delivered, but still the customers were making payments on those loans to vehicles that he actually did not deliver. So the dealer also loaned money got money from another bank for cars he delivered, and neither he or his business ever had the titles to those. So some pretty hardcore fraud going on that one. And car buyers were left liable for the loans for vehicles which they didn't even have. And additionally, that dealer in New Jersey offered to sell cars for individuals on consignment, and he did not return the money when he sold those vehicles. Pretty unethical stuff there. It's really no doubt that person should have went to prison because of the unethical operations, especially when you're consigning a vehicle, sell that vehicle and don't pay the person off. That's some pretty bad stuff there. And I really don't understand how anyone can think they can get away with these type of fraudulent types of transactions, because they always get caught. Here's another scenario where a dealer was recently sentenced to 27 months in prison in connection with an automobile loan application for multiple borrowers. And this dealer in New Jersey even directed his employees to submit documents to lenders that falsely stated the borrower's employment or salary or sources of income. So he was actually lying on customer credit applications and even lying about the amount of down payments. So the false documents also included fictitious or altered pay stubs from those customers, where they actually altered the pay stubs in order to get them loans. And that's some pretty unethical stuff as well. And that dealer falsely indicated that the borrowers made salaries they did not make, they worked at jobs that they didn't work at, and received income from Social Security that they did not receive, and made down payments that they did not. So in some of those instances, on that case, the borrower was not even aware of these and didn't even consent to using his or her personal identifying information to obtain those automobile loans in those ways. That was a case that was actually investigated by the FBI, and that dealer did go to prison. That's some pretty serious stuff here. Listen to this case involving a Louisiana dealer. So a Louisiana dealer actually was sent to prison recently for odometer fraud and got a term of 20 months in prison and a term of 1 year supervised release. And what this dealer was doing was taking vehicles, took over 300 vehicles and lowered their odometers by about 67,000 miles. And, you would think this is some old school stuff that's not going on anymore, because, in the past, we'd have an old school dealer would stick a drill in an old mechanical odometer and roll that thing back. And now odometer fraud's become much more high tech in nature. And, those vehicle diagnostic scanners you hook up behind a steering wheel of most motor vehicles, any one of those you can feed this program through and lower the mileage readout on the vehicle's dash of just about any vehicle. And what these odometer fraudsters like this one in Louisiana aren't aware of is that the computer's odometer does not change. So even though they're changing the odometer readout on the dash, they are not changing the odometer readout on that vehicle's computer, which makes it a very traceable crime. So this Louisiana dealer was buying vehicles in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, and then he was rolling back some of those vehicles over 140,000 miles. So what's interesting, because of the age of some of those vehicles, he was not required to sign any type of disclosure statement. However, each time he altered an odometer with the intent to change that mileage, that's a violation of federal law. So even if you're not required in your state to sign some type of odometer disclosure statement, every time an odometer is changed, it is a felony that is violation of federal law. And this is common stuff here. Obviously, you can't roll back an odometer regardless of the age of the vehicle. It's a felony on every occurrence. And the way I look at it, unfortunately, I think if there's a dealer out there rolling back odometers, they should go to prison. That's a very unethical thing to do. And I think those dealers that roll back odometers, they deserve to go to prison. I truly believe that. In New York, a dealer was sentenced to prison for failing to pay on a floor plan. Now, I'm sure you're probably aware of this. A floor plan is a loan for your inventory. Okay, and when a bank or a floor planning company will provide you a loan to go buy vehicles at the dealer auctions, and when you sell those vehicles, it's very clear you got to pay down that floor plan. Floor plan fraud is very, very common, and there's two parts of floor plan fraud. Number one, a dealer will file false information to get an initial floor plan, but then when they sell the vehicle, they won't pay that floor plan down. So here's a dealer in New York that was indicted for selling vehicles and failed to use the proceeds from the vehicle sales to pay off the bank loans. That's called floor plan debt or floor plan fraud. And the indictment on that one alleged the dealer did not inform their lender when they sold vehicles using floor plan financing, and then that failure to report the sales allowed the dealerships to delay or even avoid making those required payments to their bank for those sold vehicles. And in such situations like this, the bank cannot repossess the sold vehicles to recover the loans because the dealership has already transferred that title to the new owner, which prevents the former bank from repossessing that vehicle. So that dealer was actually sentenced to 4 years in prison. I'm a big believer, floor plans are fine. I never recommend getting too large of a floor plan. I think there's instances where you can get a dealer's license, go into any dealer auction, and get basically a $250,000 floor plan. A floor plan's a credit card. And I hate to say this, there are scenarios when I've helped someone get a dealer's license and I'll drive by their lot and, a month later they got 50 cars on the lot, balloons flying all over the place, salesperson's running all over the place, and I'll drive by a month later and that lot is empty and there's a for lease sign in the window. Well, they couldn't pay on their floor plan, and so they got their vehicles repossessed. I started with a floor plan. I started with a $25,000 floor plan when I first got my dealer's license. I did actually end up bumping that up to a $50,000 plan, but in less than a year. In fact, it took about 10 months. I paid that floor plan down all the way, paid it off, and from then on out, I had a cash inventory, which is something that I strongly encourage every dealer to consider, having a goal of having a cash inventory. But if you do have a floor plan, it is imperative that you pay down that floor plan every time you sell that vehicle. You sell a vehicle, pay down that floor plan. Please do. Also, here's an interesting case that I want to talk to you before we end the video. You might recall a few years ago, there was what was called a Toyota Buyback program. And the Rusty Truck Buyback program by Toyota was designed to compensate Toyota owners who bought certain models of Toyota trucks that were especially susceptible to frame rusting, and it included some older Tacomas, Tundras, and Sequoias. And this program specifically excluded dealers from participating. Well, there was one dealer that bought 350 inexpensive rusting Toyota trucks at dealer wholesale auctions that he would then obtain random people's driver's licenses and illegally titled those 350 trucks in a person's name, after which he bribed a Toyota service manager and another dealership employee to process the paperwork for the bogus buyback vehicles. And it's reported that he got about 150% of Kelley Blue Book value for many of those trucks, and he made $4 million off of that scam. And okay, he made some money off that. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for that $4 million scam off of Toyota. So there was a lot of thought that went into that one. I mean, it's not surprising at all that person is going to prison. So unfortunately, these are the dealers that give honest dealers like you and me a bad name. This small handful of unethical dealers are the reason that we have become such a tightly regulated industry in the past few years. And I personally listen to discussions on state legislature floors when lawmakers are discussing new regulations for dealers, and I'll always tell some story about one completely unethical dealer that conducted some outrageous criminal activity, and then they'll pass a law making it more burdensome for all the honest, ethical dealers like you to run their business. I see this time and time again. Legislatures will talk about some crazy scenario involving one dealer, and they'll create a new law that puts a burden over the other 3,000 or 4,000 dealers in that state because of the actions of one, which I find absolutely unacceptable. In fact, in the next video I'm going to make, I'm going to talk about some of the crazy dealer laws that are being introduced in legislatures across the country, and how we as dealers can fight back against these anti-dealer lawmakers and let them know that we vote and they need to stop creating burdensome regulations over our industry because of a very small group of unethical dealers. And if you're ready to join me on that fight, let's go do this. Let's take this to the legislatures, let them know we vote, let them know that we are huge sales tax generators for every state in the country, and they should not punish us for, the unethical sales activity of one dealer. So I definitely want you to be aware of that. And I will be creating a new video on that here very soon. So hopefully you'll be able to take a look at that one. I hope you found this information very, very beneficial. Remember, when you have a dealer's license, there's a wealth of opportunity. If you're just willing to follow a few sets of guidelines, you don't have to break any laws to make money. In fact, the dealers that are following the laws and operating ethically and honestly are the ones that are making incredible amounts of money. So you don't have to break any law. In fact, following the laws and guidelines will make you a lot more money in this industry, since you're never going to get fined or possibly go to jail. We can't make money with a dealer's license when you're in jail. But don't worry, you're not going to go to jail unless you are really part of some very unethical money scheme. So I hope you realize that. So I do want you to be aware, I just launched my newest website. It's dealerslicense.com. Don't forget to put that S in there, dealerslicense.com. And you're going to be able to watch many of the videos that are not even available on YouTube, and you can subscribe to my podcast as well. That's the Dealer Training Podcast. You can also find my Dealer Training Podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And thank you very much for watching the video. I really appreciate that, and I want to wish you the very best of luck with your new business. Thank you very much.